Hello, all of you watching on YouTube, on Jonathan's channel, on my channel, and also hopefully live on my Substack, which is protectingtherepublic.com. This is the latest episode in the live stream series that we call the Dictators. And hello, Jonathan. Jonathan has felt a little bit like I did in the past, meaning his voice is not the best. So we're going to both struggle with our voices probably, but bear with us. As I was saying to Jonathan off air, I want to open with something I've been wanting to say for a while, but let me just open with this. He asked me, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to focus? And it's basically, I want to open with this. And for any of you that speak fluent English, you'll know what this means. And the reason I'm posting this or displaying it is because what are we doing? America, the American military, Donald Trump, MAGA, they don't have a clue. They don't have a plan. I don't care what MAGA says. In fact, I want to play something, Jonathan, that really pisses me off. A lot of what MAGA does, well, everything they do pisses me off. But this is a brief clip from one of my favorite media platforms, Fox News, talking about how the Democrats, anybody who doesn't agree with Trump is an idiot and a moron and just doesn't get it, especially if they don't support the war in Iran. So, folks, just take a quick listen to this brief clip from Fox News from last night.
The left has driven itself into a frenzy. They can't stand the idea that President Trump has pulled off a big win. It shows the depths of Trump hatred. When the president issued his threat to bomb Iran back into the Stone Age, AOC tweeted this: "The president has threatened a genocide against the Iranian people. The president must be removed from office." Oh boy, she really hates our commander-in-chief. Ilhan Omar tweeted this: "Donald Trump must be removed from office for threatening war crimes and genocide. Impeachment must be on the table." In the Senate, Ed Markey from Massachusetts said this: "The Senate needs to remove a president who wants to commit war crimes." And Senator Mark Pocan, he said, "Trump is too unhinged, dangerous, and deranged to have the nuclear codes." As the White House said, these remarks are indeed pathetic. Where is the rejoicing that President Trump has at least neutralized the terror threat that's been plaguing the world? They just can't get beyond their doom and gloom. Oh, the world is coming to an end. Here comes World War III. The economy is going to recession. Any and all negatives will be employed to undermine Trump. They want failure. They are blinded by Trump derangement.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff I could say, but let me just say this. In a perfect world where I was the president of the United States, this man would be arrested. Fox News would have their license revoked and they would be brought up on charges. Why? I'm all for freedom of the press. Believe me, I am. But this is going beyond freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. This is inciting people to believe that violations of the Constitution, violations of international law, threats of genocide are perfectly acceptable. And that anyone who disagrees with the president of the United States threatening genocide on an entire population is a traitor. This is insane. And again, in a perfect world, this media platform, and I hate to use that term, would be taken off the air, and people like that asshole would be indicted. I'm sorry, it really gets me going.
I mean, who is he? Why has he got a British accent? And talking about our country, I felt that whole address was probably the most Orwellian thing I'd seen, and possibly because his voice sounds like he's in some kind of, 1950s movie or something. His voice had an anachronism about it, but the words he was saying were chilling, which, as you say, which is, if you do not agree with the dear leader, if you do not accept that he is infallible, and that every decision he makes is mandated by God or some divine authority, that if you then don't sort of propitiate and almost worship the outcome of those decisions, no matter how disastrous, and if you don't suspend your critical thinking in favor of this dear leader, then somehow you are not just deficient, but you are evil. Because the implication by this is, if you do not agree to us smiting our enemies, then I'm sorry, but you're some kind of internal cancer that we're going to have to cut out eventually. I mean, this is the implication behind what I took from those comments.
Well, for those of you who don't live in the United States, and I venture to say the vast majority of the viewers on this channel are not, or don't get the Fox News streaming on the internet, you're not aware of the grip, the absolute iron grip hold that it has on, I would say, well, certainly half of the voting population, at least, and all of the Trump supporters, that they are fervent believers in every word that's spoken by people like that. In Fox News, this was the Fox News business channel of all things, but Fox News, all of their commentators talk just like that. Some of them are even worse. They call for outright violence and even death against those who disagree with their leader. So, you know, again, I wasn't taking this mildly or saying this mildly when I said if it were up to me, they would be off the air. Because just like has been said many, many times, freedom of speech does not allow one to yell fire in a crowded theater when it doesn't, when there is no fire. So, I mean, there are limits to constitutional rights, and inciting people to support unconstitutional, illegal actions such as genocide or violations of international law should be illegal, and they should have their license revoked, but they don't. They're more popular than ever. And I wanted to make a couple of other points here before we move on. It has been said, rightfully, I believe, justifiably, by many, many experts, geopolitical experts who know far more than me, that the reason we've become embroiled now in possibly a long-term war in Iran, the reasons we got embroiled in a disaster in Iraq and then Afghanistan and on and on and on, and even Vietnam before that, was because as Americans, we have a history of not understanding foreign cultures. And even when we go to war with another country, we don't understand it. We don't take the time to understand the culture, the history, the language, their beliefs, their religion, you know, on and on and on. We just don't get it. And I'm going to put forth or posit an opinion on that I've said for many, many years. In America, the military specifically and our intelligence services depend almost solely on technology, on signals intelligence for the most part, but satellite intelligence, technology in general. And we have abandoned human intelligence, which means spying. I started off my long and not so illustrious career in the United States Army in signals intelligence as a German translator. I intercepted German military communications in what was then East Germany when it was in the Soviet Union. When it dissolved, when it no longer existed after the Soviet Union ended, I cross-trained or retrained as a counterintelligence agent, human intelligence. So I went from signals intelligence to human intelligence. I can tell you, the American military gives this lip service to human intelligence. We don't believe in it. We give a very, very small percentage of our budget and training and emphasis and focus on human intelligence, meaning for many, many years, we have not had spies in, or enough, certainly in the Kremlin, in Beijing, in any of the Middle Eastern countries. We don't have enough people that speak the languages. So we've fallen behind. We don't understand the cultures we're going to war against. And now it's playing out in Iran. We don't get it. Look, satellite intelligence is great. All kinds of electronic intelligence is great, but it can't get in here. It doesn't tell you the motivation, what makes people do the things they do. Human intelligence does. And we don't have good human intelligence anymore. And that's a disgrace. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be one of the reasons for our downfall, certainly in our wars.
And you know, you can trace this through all sorts of things. But I think one of the aspects of the surge that happened in Iraq was also an increase in what you're talking about, human intelligence on the ground, understanding different sort of, say, tribal regions, leaders who to negotiate with, etc. It's the mechanics, or the sort of hidden mechanics, I think, of imperial process is actually understanding in detail. If we flip that round and turn that to Russia, I'm not going to say this in a positive way, but what you do have to say about many of the people that Russia puts forward in its so-called negotiating teams, many of them actually have education in multiple languages. Lavrov, for instance, comes from a particular background, speaking several obscure languages. Russian intelligence may be in service of really kind of quite vile ends, but actually that sort of human intelligence is a core part of it. That education in local languages, culture, etc., is a key part of it. Now, of course, they're doing it, we know, to be able to influence, manipulate, and to propagate their own system of, I'll call it governance, not really governance as such, but they want allies around the world. But they also understand that there's a certain amount you have to put in there to understand the mechanics of those local peoples and leaders. If you want to subvert them, you have to understand their weaknesses. You have to understand their ambitions, their desires, and what it is you have to offer in order to subvert, manipulate, and create those kind of alliances and networks. Yeah, I think the Russians are doing it in service of ridiculous ends. Therefore, the result doesn't always appear to be positive, but actually the mechanics of it, it's useful looking into the detail of some of the mechanics of how they achieve that.
Look, the Russians have beat us hands down for decades as far as human intelligence, based on just exactly what you said. Most of their operatives speak multiple languages. They've had experience either living or studying in foreign countries, their target countries. Let me give you a good example of what I'm talking about very quickly. When I served in Iraq during the beginning of the war, 2003, we had such a dearth, meaning such limited amount of Arabic translators, even though we had gone to war in that exact area about 10 years before, in the early 1990s, if anybody remembers. And so we knew we needed Arabic translators, and we have one of the best military language institutes in the world. I'm a graduate, the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. Did we train and pump out thousands of Arabic linguists after that? No. A few, yes. Why am I saying this? When I was in Iraq, we had so few Arabic linguists that in the army, or even contract linguists, we had to employ very often local Iraqis. I don't mean professional translators or even government staff, just anybody that was there that spoke English, that could translate for us. They could have been in the Mukhabarat, the secret police, secret service of Iraq. We didn't know. We just had to have somebody to translate for us. I was just blown away when that happened, but what could I do? That just goes to show, and showed me, how little we pay attention or care as a nation about human intelligence, or even something as simple, Jonathan, as learning the language of the country that we have the audacity to invade. To me, this is incredible, and I will feel this way forever. We need to focus on human intelligence even more than we do on our technological intelligence assets, in my opinion.
This is it. And the language is just the foundation. We know, and I know from long experience, we have many people who understand Russian, who actually know quite substantial amounts about Russian history and culture. That doesn't mean you understand everything. It doesn't mean you understand the mechanics of the system itself. It doesn't mean you understand how to counter it and where the real threat lies. In many instances, the Russianists that we turned out in the West often would have a rather rose-tinted view of the country, in fact. They would interact with liberal elites, some of whom themselves are entirely, their mental framework was far more European, and perhaps they themselves didn't really quite understand what country they lived in, or they were willing to project a certain impression that they thought their interlocutors wanted to know, or their friends wanted to hear. Not everyone wants to hear about the sort of real darkness and cynicism. So even the Russianists that we were turning out, I would say not that many of them have maybe proved that useful in countering this version of Russia we see, which is a reversion, I would say, to the base template, which is extreme authoritarianism and the desire to control. And part of that is the projection of violence and coercion that we are seeing.
Well, what we've done for decades, Jonathan, and you know this perhaps better than I do as a Russia expert, is we have fostered, we have employed and promoted the Russia-centric, Kremlin-centric view of the world, of history of the world, as they see it. That's played out enormously and painfully during the war in Ukraine. It's finally opened the eyes of not everyone, but certainly many, many people finally in the West and America. The scholars and the folks you're talking about that were trained in Russia or about Russia in this country, at least over decades, looked at it from the way that the Kremlin told them to. And they ignored history. They ignored what the Ukrainians said. They ignored what any of the Eastern European countries said, those vassal states that were under the boot of the Soviet Union. They didn't care to listen to them. They only listened to the propaganda, the lies, and the rewritten history as came out of the Kremlin. So, for example, would we trust this man to know the culture and history of the country that he just invaded? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, that's a nice AI,
Oh, it's AI, of course, but
that's a nice AI image there. You can see,
But you know what it's doing? It's showing how badly he pronounces or mispronounces the Ayatollah in Iran. I mean, as an example, and people in the military can get at me if they want to, but even today, it bugs me when Americans say Iran or Iraq. It just reminds me of hillbillies. It's not Iran or Iraq, it's Iran and Iraq. But that's just a very, very small example how we just refuse to even try to pronounce the name of the countries correctly because we disdain them so much. We feel they're so far below us. It's not worth learning their history, their language, or even how to pronounce the name of the country.
I was about to say, in that image, you can see both of those characters going off to a bar and having a nice beer together. Oh, hang on a second. And then I realized that actually Trump doesn't drink either. So maybe they could go off and have a nice round of golf together. Oh, I mean, if the other guy wasn't dead, of course.
Well, I think Trump would probably fall asleep, though, during any prolonged meeting with any of the Ayatollahs or the diplomats. Well, that's, talking about my point. To further it along, do you think, or any of the viewers, that we, America, are serious about negotiations with Iran by sending Witkoff, and that other, and Kushner, these two morons, these two real estate grifters from New York to negotiate, in quotes, with Iran, and before with Russia? Are we serious when we send clowns like that to negotiate a war? Of course not. That just shows our disdain.
It shows a lack of seriousness. It shows, I think, a lack of commitment to outcomes. Now, it also shows, to an extent, we have to question what the outcomes are. If the outcomes are grift, if the outcomes are self-enrichment, then yeah, those guys can probably achieve something towards those aims. But if we look at the aims as being more in the guise of traditional statecraft, actual outcomes that would benefit America as a country and whoever is being negotiated, we can take Ukraine in this very clearly as well. If it was a traditional negotiation, then the choice of those individuals shows an absolute contempt for those potential traditional outcomes. But actually, I think what we have to interpret it is there's no interest in those outcomes. There's no interest whatsoever in the sort of traditional agreements of diplomacy. And indeed, if anything is to be agreed, we have to question whether any of it's actually going to be committed to or delivered, which is something we talked about on yesterday's conversation with Ben Hodges. So what it's showing is not just a lack of seriousness, but a total contempt for the outcomes that are being promised from the process.
Well, I agree. And let me just put this up if I could. Again, talking about contempt for the process, and I am obviously flipping to something else because in the interest of time today, as we all know, at least the viewers of this program, this channel, and anyone else that follows this, we sent America J.D. Vance to prop up Viktor Orban in his election coming Sunday, and he's actually behind in the election. But I got this off of Truth Social, which I loathe reading, but sometimes I have to. And you can read this yourself, but look at it later if you want to. A totally disgusting a series of comments by Donald Trump praising Viktor Orban and how he fights tirelessly for and loves his great country and his people. He's asking the Hungarians to get out and vote for Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban will never let the great people of Hungary down. I'm with him all the way. Donald Trump. And thank you for your attention to this matter. He didn't say that. I do, but he usually does end it like a memo to his secretary. It's really ridiculous. But yeah, and then here's a picture with his best forever friend there at the White House recently. Boy, birds of a feather, huh? This is the kind of person that Donald Trump loves. I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest with you, Jonathan, if he actually does, in some strange way, envy or respect the Ayatollah, in his own crazy kind of a way, because the guy's got supreme power. He's got a real iron grip on his country. So even outwardly, he may hate him because he hates Muslims. It's no lie there. I wouldn't be surprised if he would do this, posing for a photo op. I really don't.
Well, I mean, just have to translate that into his body language towards Mandani in the Oval Office. Everyone thought, because we exist in this sort of ideological framework of understanding the world, that the natural behavior for Trump would be to not feel comfortable with this guy. But actually what we saw there was pure power status. He recognized that this guy has a certain amount of power, not due from his office, but for the fact that he's fought it and won it and got it. And that's something Trump appreciates. And I think he'll look at any system and not see it through an ideological lens, but he'll see the pure power play beneath it. That is one skill that he has. I mean, it's not a skill that one wants in a democratic leader necessarily, or to define the world purely on that basis. I think a balanced leader will understand the power play, but will also understand, the other stuff that sits atop it. What's interesting here, before we, get to the end, I do want to also talk about, because my thumbnail today says, is the Iran ceasefire dead? So we need to cover that. But one last thing on Hungary, J.D. Vance, if we listen to The Bulwark and Mycelis and a couple of others, there's some interesting speculation going around at the moment that actually this is all part of J.D. Vance starting to position himself as a transition from Trumpism to Vanceism, as it were, or a new incarnation of MAGA. And you have to look at it. This is not so much, I think, his attempt to genuinely get Orban in power. It actually benefits him if Orban stays, but maybe he's looking at this thinking, well, I don't really care one way or another, or maybe I don't actually have the power. This is his way of looking presidential for the kind of conservative CPAC world. I also think, honestly, and people are going to think this is maybe a little bit weird, I think this was his audition for Vladimir Putin. This is like, our current guy has done you lots of favors. Doesn't always do you favors, but our current guy's done you lots of favors, and there's something going on there, right? And on balance, the Kremlin and its techniques have been more supportive of Trump than anyone else over the last decade or so. Whether that's helped or not is questionable, but they've certainly been favorable towards it, and they've put assets, invested assets to ensure a Trump victory. I think that's beyond contention, actually. And they've also tried to pour petrol on the fire of U.S. democratic process to create a sort of chaotic environment where such a candidate like Trump could do better rather than a consensus-driven, more rational, traditional candidate. I think these are almost beyond contention. So Vance is saying, okay, this guy, he's yesterday, right? I'm tomorrow. I'm willing to step up as your next guy in the White House.
I think that's a very valid point. It's pure opportunism, just as it's pure opportunism that Trump would cozy up to a Xi. Normally, he would hate him because, well, he doesn't like anyone who doesn't look like us, as he's put forth very often, doesn't have white skin. But no, Xi is a strong man, so he just automatically likes him. He also sees money to be made through trade with China, and the same with Putin. He sees money to be made there. There's no ideology, Jonathan. You know that. There's no ideology. There's no plan. There's no agenda with Trump except self-aggrandizement and self-enrichment. And I think you're right. I think it's a valid point about J.D. Vance. He wants to be the next president. I don't know whether the Republicans are going to put him up as their main candidate. They very well may be, but that's how he sees himself. So as you said, we don't have that much longer today. What are your thoughts on the ceasefire? It's very fragile. It's already been violated by Israel, who said they never even signed on to it to begin with. Where do you see this, the current status of the ceasefire, and what do you predict for the next week or so?
I think we have to look, obviously the mechanics of it suggest that the ceasefire is going to be fragile, but ultimately whether it holds or not is to ask who benefits. Who benefits from it flaring up? Who benefits from it going into an escalatory cycle again? Who benefits from out-and-out peace and stability? And I think we have to look at this in terms of the authoritarian alliance, and it's probably contingent on some of the things that are going to happen on the ground. So, for instance, if there's a flare-up of opposition to the Iranian regime internally, then I think it benefits the Iranian regime to have maybe some sort of limited ongoing confrontation with the United States, because that provides a distraction. Does it benefit Trump? Well, of course, if Epstein starts coming back on the agenda, which it inevitably will, then you need something to get it off the agenda, whether that is renewed flare-ups in Iran, whether that's targeting Cuba, or finding other targets, or going back to Greenland, or, as they seem to be choosing, pick a fight with NATO, right? You lose against Russia-Iran alliance, or what do? You pick on your allies. So this is an extraordinary abusive bullying tactic, which we're seeing, reemerge here. But also it should be familiar from what we've seen over the last year and what we saw in Trump 1. So there will need to be something to fill the headlines. Then we need to ask about other authoritarians. Does it suit China to have an escalatory cycle, or, this flare up? Not necessarily, because, China's far more dependent on the oil that comes from there. Then again, there's far less pressure now to stop Russia exporting its gray-fleet oil to China and other people. There was some suggestion, at least, of secondary sanctions that was starting to make that a little more difficult. Now everyone's going back and filling their boots with Russian oil again. So in terms of the great power alliance, it probably makes sense to sit somewhere between either temporary flare-up or a sort of managed scenario, to ensure the United States is distracted elsewhere and does not go down the route of implementing measures which start to put pressure again on Russia. So the conclusion to that is that I don't think it's going to go away, either from a sort of immediate, tactical point of view, but also from a long-term strategic point of view. But Trump's turned his ire on Europe. It's fairly predictable that at some point he starts Ukraine bashing again. And what we saw from the recently leaked phone calls, which I think we can pick up tomorrow, is this extraordinary line which has a ring of terrible authenticity about it, which suggests that the US and their primary goal vis-a-vis their relations in Europe, the main focus is to get Ukraine out of the way, one way or another. We've been saying it for the last year or so, even longer, but for the last year or so, we've been saying the primary goal is to just get Ukraine out of the way so they can crack on with making piles of money with their friends Putin and advancing authoritarian slide, or the authoritarian international network. Well, that leak seems to confirm our absolutely most cynical fears around this.
Well, my last thought on this for today is that the ceasefire was always a joke. It was the taco for Trump. It was the off-ramp that he decided to take. None of those 10 points were anything of an advantage to the United States. They were a slap in the face. They were a kick in the butt. They are a disgrace. we lost the war. And he's gleeful, as is Hegseth, about how we won the war. As has been said many, many times, just blowing the hell out of a country, dropping, millions of tons of bombs, hitting 11,000, 12,000 targets does not mean you won the war. It means you know how to blow up and break things. That's all. And in fact, in doing so, we've pretty much depleted our arsenal of weapons, of high-tech weapons that I don't think we're going to be able to rebuild or to replenish anytime soon, but that's certainly for another show as well.
Yeah. And this is also a category error, surely, because it's saying we've won the conventional war. It's not making a distinction between the asymmetric war and the conventional war. And you could perhaps make a case that the US won the conventional war.
Yes.
But actually the impact and strength of the regime in Iran does not come through conventional weapons. It comes through unconventional techniques, asymmetric techniques, and it comes from the ability to project geographic control over Hormuz and the region. And of course, I suspect that whatever the US has bombed, it may have damaged the capacity, and this is probably more Israel, the capacity to produce drones at scale. Has it damaged the stock, the vast stocks of Shaheeds and other asymmetric munitions? Not in the least. So from that point of view, it's tremendous failure, and it's the failure to realize that it's a failure which compounds that.
Well, it's not only a failure of the United States to understand the culture, as now we've talked about a lot in this episode. It's a failure to understand current warfare, which we've also discussed quite a bit. The United States military, contrary to their lip service, is still fighting the last war. We're still armor heavy. We sent over a ton of tanks this time around because we don't have enough drones, so we didn't do that. We sent, 3 aircraft carrier groups, aircraft carriers, when they're sending, drones, some of them as cheap as $20, but even the most expensive ones are tens of thousands of dollars, and we're shooting them down with hundreds of millions of dollars of aircraft or missiles. So America doesn't understand the culture. They don't understand the war that we're fighting now. They have not diminished the ability of Iran to strike out. Most all of their assets are deep, deep underground. Not only have we not seriously diminished their arsenal of weapons and rockets, we've not seriously diminished their manufacturing capability to make more, which are also underground, or in some cases in China, who are supplying them with rocket motors, and motors and components to their missiles. So no, we've lost. And to hear Hegseth and Trump just bellow and scream about how much we've won this war really just embarrasses the United States and shows how far down we have sunk. And it seems as if NATO, not NATO, but Europe at least, has recognized how ridiculous Trump is and how they need to distance themselves from him immediately. Last thought for me, Jonathan.
Well, everyone except Mark Rutte. I don't think Mark Rutte is right.
I don't want to talk about Mark today.
But let's not
tomorrow.
even mention him.
Tomorrow. I don't want to talk about him. He pisses me off. I talked about him yesterday. I'll mention him tomorrow. Is NATO dead? I think NATO in its current form is dead. Yes. They shot themselves in the foot. It's suicide. However, is a group of NATO nations not going to form a collective defense pact and group? Yes, they already are. And I believe that's the future of NATO, not in NATO per se, but in a group of the willing, if you will, within NATO, minus some people like Orban, and form a very, very strong military union. At least that's how I foresee it. And that's going to have to be my last thought for today. Any last words, Jonathan, before we go?
No, that is it. There's so many more rabbit holes we can go down with this one. But I just think it's critical to bear in mind, bring together what we were talking about there, which is it's not even transactionality, because transactions suggest there's some basis in law. It's the pure exercise of informal grifting power. That's what drives Trump's regime, and the communiques intercepted with in Hungary absolutely, confirm that. And we have to look at the ceasefire through that same lens. This is not a classic ceasefire. It's not a traditional war. It's not a traditional exercise of power, and this will not be a traditional peace either.
No, and that's going to have to be it for today. Please, folks, Actually, this is tomorrow, Saturday. Please scroll down to this channel again on Monday at this same time, where we're going to continue with a new episode of The Dictators. We don't have the exact focus yet, but we will. So come back here Monday at the same time, and we will see you all then. In the meantime, please subscribe to Jonathan's channel, my channel, The No Delusion Zone, and we will see you soon. And we're gone.